Hey Ryan, good afternoon. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Ramesh. How are you doing?
Not too bad myself. Thank you for taking the time for my third episode of my podcast. I've been following your work for God knows, I don't know, 2 years approximately. And the first time I came across your profile was one of your posts about your Tesla Model S and your drive, how the weather was influencing your range, how the speed was influencing your range. And I told myself, finally, there's someone who is actually driving a car and commenting on it, not someone who knows about the car but never drove one but comments on
Correct.
it. So tell me something about yourself and maybe also start off with your Tesla experience.
Yeah, so I'm a fastener joining, mechanical joining, and automation expert. I worked for Stanley Black and Decker for about 11 years. They have a group called Stanley Engineer Fastening. They do all the fasteners you're not going to find at a Home Depot. So they make the critical fasteners from Caterpillar to Halliburton to Tesla.
Hmm.
They have different divisions. They own some iconic brands like Helicoil and Pop Rivets, and there's an old brand of theirs called Camcar that used to make 80% of the world's engineered screws. They're still the number one supplier to McMaster, and so like definitely a reputable fastener company. Was there almost 11 years. Last 5 years of that, I was managing the Tesla and EV business for them.
Hmm.
Um, so we lived in San Jose and got to work in the plant quite a bit. And that was where we bought, you see the cars every day in the plant, start to kind of get there. I was funny enough, when we moved to California in 2016, I was on the Bronco waiting list in Houston. And so I had a dealer. I've been on this waiting list for like 18 months. I'm in an old Ford Edge, like really ready to get out of it. Been patiently waiting for like 18 months to buy this Bronco. And I called him on a Wednesday and he said that it was going to be at least another year before they had any stock available. And so I immediately went on the Tesla website, found a used 2016 Model S that I could afford, and then bought it in 2018 was when we bought it. So I loved that car. I drove it everywhere. It had horrible range. The first one we had, I think it only had 210.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, 210, 220. It was 220. So realistically, in the heat or in the cold, it's like 130, 100. So it was not ideal for road trips. I actually drove it to Texas and back 5 different times. Um, yeah, we'd go home for a month. So my wife would fly home later in the month, and I would drive home with the dog for over a month. And so it made sense to drive it. I'll never do it again. I'll tell you that.
Sure. But why did it have such a bad range? Was it the 75D by any chance, the
Yeah.
smallest battery of them all? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So the second one I got, where you probably saw my first post, was a 2018 90.
Okay.
Uh, so it was closer to like a 270 range still available on it. And that was a lot better. The problem with that one was the software was glitchy.
Hmm.
And I ended up selling it 6 months after I got it because the market was so high. I made money on the
For
car
sure.
that I bought. This is before the used car market had tanked, but there was a capacitor issue, was what maintenance was telling me, that was shorting out the AC, shorting out the screen. The screen would go blank 3 or 4
Okay.
times a day while you're driving. And this is right as the Tesla service just got dumped into the ocean, and they'd lost all their hands throughout the pandemic. And I think Houston used to have 18 service people. Now you go in there and there's just one sad little 20-year-old kid standing at the counter with starry eyes and doesn't know a thing about the product.
Poor kid.
And because the one downside of Tesla and all their OTA powers, they don't have a help desk. Like, it's a
Yeah.
software based vehicle. If my AC or my infotainment's not working, I want to be able to message you like Apple and you send me an update. I don't want to schedule a service call in 5 weeks, is what they're currently averaging on scheduling a service call that's not critical.
Okay.
And then you forget about it 5 weeks later. I'd missed the appointments. I'm like, with all the OTA power you have, I should be able to tell you what's wrong with my car and you check it and fix it.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, I think that's one of the Achilles heel here with Tesla. They have all this software prowess. They have a beautiful car, brilliant range. They kind of redefine the way we think about automobiles. But there's a big but. The customer service part is still one of those glitchy areas where they still have a lot of, criticism. They're receiving criticism, and rightfully so, because you own a Ford, you own a GM or Volkswagen. You bring your car into the dealership, they fix it for you. That's it, right? And in this case, you don't have a proper dealership, just an established network. And the good thing is the car is quite reliable. I mean, I've been driving one for the last 8 months and it's been perfect. But once it goes bad for some reason, software or hardware, where do you call, right? You reach out to the app and you wait for the recall. So that I can sympathize with that, and that's absolutely a pain point owning a Tesla if there's an issue, right? That's a big if again.
Yeah, and as a software guy now in my new role at Finding Engineered Solutions, we run a SaaS effort for EV designers. But
Sure.
uh, now that I look so much at the software, like, in the lean startup world, the term feedback loop, the term minimal viable product, those are things that we do. We get the first Rivian R1T out the door, and then we clean up the mistakes for the next 3 years. That's how software launches too. But there's got to be that feedback loop. And I don't see that at Tesla. I don't see the customer feedback loop that's telling you, I don't like your map on Model Y. I love the car that my wife drives. But when I am used to my Model S and the two screens, and now I go to a singular screen and a singular map, I lost the map on my Model S. There was a nice little map in the steering screen. Now my wife has this massive map, and it's like I'm trying to navigate a city streets, and it's still showing me the 300-mile view. I'm like, where's the zoom in? Where's the additional help? And I have no recourse to tell them that that sucks, and I'd like you to fix it.
Understand. I mean, how about the small screen, right? I read that I was looking for one for my Model 3. There is an aftermarket part which you can buy. I think it costs $250, and to fit it, you can either fit it by yourself, or you can ask someone else to fit it, and that's going to cost you another $100. That is a lifesaver in many of the Model 3s and Ys I see, because not many are comfortable taking the eye off the street and looking into the map, because it's still quite an adjustment to make, right? I'm quite okay with the touch only interface because I got used to it.
Right.
I don't miss the buttons per se, but what I do miss is having that augmented reality kind of projected screen in front of me. I never had to take my view off the street when I was driving my old Mazda, but now I have to to check something. Am I on the right street? Did I miss a turn? Did I take an exit which is correct? All these things come into play when you take your eye off the street, especially when you're having like in the streets of Europe. Actually, you can imagine there are some streets where you have like six exits in the span of, I don't know, 25 meters. And then you miss one and you have to go another 20-mile radius to come back to the same point. So that is a pain point which I have with my Tesla. But currently they have the Google Maps, which I think is amazing. They even show you, so at least the version that we have here, it has the Google Map. If you go to the map view, it shows on the bottom right corner, it's powered by Google,
Is
and
it?
it's amazing, man.
Yeah, I
it's
don't
so
have
much
that
easier.
because
Probably it's
I have to vet their math. Like because I since we moved home to Texas, I drive a lot more to Austin and see the factory and whatever. But um, so I'm in the car 10,000 times more than we ever were for the last 3 years in California, and it the map is frustrating. Like I've noticed that it's often wrong. Like I'll vet it with Apple Maps, and there is a nice feature that you can send the Apple Map, and it'll actually show it'll
oh
map
really?
that route within it, and that's
Okay.
convenient. But yeah, the map for me is a huge sticking point. And on Model S, the toggles did a lot more. And I just found last week, if you hold down the left toggle, it gives you more options to give the toggle. But even just something as simple as the fan for the AC, you could toggle that up and down with the right because the autopilot was all in the shifter. There was
Mhm.
no, there's an additional shifter for autopilot down on the bottom left, there was the blinker shifter, and that left that right toggle up. It could control the radio, change stations, it could control the AC. There was a number of things you could do with that one button, because I find myself, it's bad on Tesla. It's even worse when I drove a Polestar. I
Oh
find
yeah.
myself trying to mess with that screen, and I'm going 80 miles an hour and I'm doing this. That's not safe. Like, Polestar's worse because they don't have one operating system. They have Google Maps, they
Yeah.
have Google Play for music, Spotify for music, and these all show up in the home screen, but all the vehicle controls conflict with the app. So if you're messing with their AC, it takes you into a whole new screen
Page. Yeah. Yeah.
while you were trying to pay attention to the map. The map's now disappeared
Yeah.
completely,
Yeah.
and that I almost wrecked. Like because Hertz, they give you these EVs with no instructions, no how to. Here's the key. Have fun. Don't bring it back empty, or we'll charge you $35. Like
Right.
that's the speech you get, and then you get in it, and you're like, okay, I thought this would be a lot easier to figure out. And I'm driving a brand new electric vehicle, and even as someone that drove a Tesla for 6 years, I didn't know what to do. There were so many things foreign about it. It was like, okay, this is not comfortable to me.
This is absolutely the case, right? So what I do tell all my friends and colleagues is that I keep as a tradition to test drive all the new EVs. The one thing that is common is no controls are common. The common denominator is actually every EV has its own way of reacting to your inputs, be it your gas pedal or your the way the steering reacts, the touch interface. Especially you spoke about Polestar. My experience with Polestar was exactly the same. And add on top of it, the screen size is quite small compared to the one that you have in Tesla. So you're actually messing up in a smaller screen, trying to touch the interface, trying to go back, go forth, close an app. That is kind of an issue, absolutely. And probably you might have an older version of Tesla. The one that I have is from 2022. Perhaps the latest version they have I mean across all the models they have Google Map as default.
Yeah, I'll have to check that the next time I look at it to see. Ours is a 21 Model Y, is what my wife drives. We got rid of my Model S, so we're down to one car.
It still should be possible that you are getting the latest version of the apps, I think. I mean, the one I have just one app, the default app, when it comes to navigation. I don't have any specific. I don't
We
just
don't
use
even
it.
have the turn signal views updates. So the newer ones give you the
Yes,
peripheral. I don't
yes.
have the turn signal peripherals, and I don't have the rear backup peripherals where the Model Y
Okay.
Performance I rented from Hertz. Like when I was backing up, I could see center and the sides. I don't
Sides.
have that
Yeah.
on our Model Y now.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, it's very interesting that you have so many different options. Like it's still from 2022, you said, right? 2021?
21, yeah. I mean, we
Yeah.
weren't
So,
straight out the factory. I waited until they had enough screw ups that I was aware of personally, that I waited for some of that to die down, because you never buy the first year.
that's
That's just
true. That's true. I mean, I have to tell you, Ryan, I mean, I've had a few rides back and forth in Michigan with the Tesla Model Y. The autopilot, that it works much better in the United States than in Germany because the streets are so similar between the states. The road signs are common between the states. There are a few exceptions for sure, but the streets are quite wide. The roads are straight. It's much more of an easier implementation when it comes to autopilot in the United States than it is in Germany or in Europe per se. Every country has their own way of executing the road regulations. So autopilot is something that I do miss driving a Tesla in Germany because it sucks here.
yeah, I could see that. Our highways are so, I mean, y'all have the Autobahn, but we have 27 Autobahns going in 37 different directions. And so no matter what city you're driving to, it's a long straight.
Like, yeah, there's
I
nothing
caught
much
it.
you could do
It
wrong.
gets fussy at night. I've done it enough, from California to Texas. There's certain areas where I can't read the sides of the road. Lately, it's been glitching, doing an autocorrect. If I'm just
Okay.
using the pedal automation and
Mm-hmm.
not steering automation, it will. register we're too close to the side of the lane, and it has that autocorrect where it'll actually
Mm-hmm.
push you.
It'll push it back. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's happened a number of times when I'm dead center in the lane, and it's actually pushing me out of the lane.
Oh, okay.
Now it
Okay.
catches itself. It like gives you a boost to it. It's not like, I don't know if you'd ever driven some of the old, I forget who had it, but a few of the legacy automotive had some ADAS early on, driver safety stuff, and one of them
Right.
had the lane correction, and it was like knee jerk. Like when it did it, I mean, you felt the
Yeah.
steering wheel
Yeah.
just jerk
Yeah.
out of your hands. Where
Was not
Tesla,
smooth.
you don't
Yeah.
feel it in the steering wheel. The car's doing it for you, and I think it caught itself both times. I think it was going to veer out, and then it realized, oh
And
crap, I screwed up, and pushed back in.
that's interesting. But do you drive with autopilot on most of the time when you go for a long distance drive, or do you prefer to drive
I
yourself?
don't use the steering because I get yelled at by it too much. My grip's not tight enough. I need to get the enhanced. My buddy has like one of the first Model 3s, and so he got free charging for life. He got free advanced driving for life. This is when they were giving away
Wow.
the store. And his has the advanced in his Model 3, and he can take both hands off, which I can't. So I may do the upgrade, but right now I just use the cruise control automation. I don't use the steering because it's not worth it. If you ever drive, it's like driving from Michigan or Detroit to Cleveland. It's very small towns. Like you hit a small town every
Yep.
other city, and the roads aren't that great, and so it's like the steering just fusses too much. At least in Texas, I use it. I use it when I use it, but it always yells at me. It never
Okay.
fails. I'm either not looking or my hands aren't holding tight enough, and it screams at me to stop it.
That's a weird reaction from the car, right? If you think about it. But
Yeah.
you're from the south. How is the weather affecting your range? Can you comment on it?
So my wife is a design florist, and so she had some photo shoot yesterday, and so she drives out to, first and foremost, it's killing it on the highway. Highway is miserable. The
Okay.
road from Houston to Austin is very hilly.
Mm-hmm.
I drove from Dallas to Austin meeting investors, and then I met Tesla, and then I came into to Houston, and multiple times they build these roads for gas vehicles, so it's a slow incline and then a crazy slow decline,
Right.
where I want the slow incline, but then I want your steep decline to give me regenerative braking. Like in
Mm-hmm.
California, the hills do this and then that. So when you're driving from LA to San Jose, you get these long, deep, steep
Right.
down curves that ramp your battery back up so you don't see as much. So I had hills and I had 105, Fahrenheit degree weather, and it ate my lunch. It ate more than
Right.
half of the range. The other part that is horrible is the cabin protection. So my
Mm-hmm.
wife's out at a photo shoot. The car's sitting in direct sun. She's there for 9 hours, and me just being me, I'm not creeping on her, but I wanted to watch the battery because I'd been noticing that. I was traveling earlier this week. She lost 30% of her battery in an 8 hour period without the car moving.
Yeah, the battery needs to keep it cool, right? If not, it'll go into the region where you don't want it to be. That's
Is that
absolutely.
what it is? Is it something blows up, something catches fire? If it gets, so normal
Yeah,
cars get 160 in the cabin. So what happens if the cabin of a Tesla gets to 160?
I think that's a common denominator. If you think about, I mean, I saw this once in action with a Kona, a Hyundai Kona, and also the one with the Ionic 5 and 6. If you keep it on the driveway and you have asphalt below it, it's 110, 120, 115. The batteries will also get reflected heat from your roads, right? So even though if so up top, upside of the car, in this case, Tesla has a glass panel, which means the heat can transfer through much faster.
Yep.
But other cars, let's say Ionic 5 or 6, they do have pretty good insulation from up top, but they have still the reflection issue from the roads, right? So what it does is it'll kick off its low voltage battery to check the battery temperature in a regular basis, especially it'll keep track also your record temperatures. So the history of last 5, 6, 7 days, and it'll know, okay, my average is, I don't know, 100 degrees, right? So it'll know the time in some cases, and it'll know, okay, at this point of time, I have to measure the temperature again because it's the day, and based on my average, it's going to be 100 plus. And if it is 100 plus, it'll start the cooling actually.
Yep.
That's what is eating your battery life when it's just parked in your garage or in your driveway.
Is it just AC or is thermal turning on at that point too?
Depends on the duration of your waiting period. So at one point of time, it'll not just be AC. They also have the coolant liquid, which will go through the battery, which is usually used for preheating in winter, right? And it'll do the exact same thing, but cooling or in the summer. The weird thing about batteries, as you know, the 20 degrees Celsius, 60-ish Fahrenheit, is actually both cooling and heating. It depends on the year, the time of the year. If it's winter, the same thing, it's heating. If it's summer, the same thing is cooling. So the infrastructure of the thermal management is designed for just one target temperature with a small range, so that they don't have to invest crazy amount of calculations and permutations. Nevertheless, it's going to eat up your battery, especially if you're not in a charger and the battery is actually using the power from the charger to cool it or heat it. It's going to take much of your power, absolutely.
That's my biggest complaint about the EV market is the lack of believability in range. Like you tell me you have a 400-mile range based on me driving 3 of the top OEM in the country's cars. That's not accurate. You don't have a 400-mile range. You have at best a 220-mile range, a 200. That retention is the gap in the market today that I think even new buyers don't truly recognize. It's like I've driven these so long and I've seen so many cases where I've lost more than half of the range. We have a 305-mile range. To drive to Dallas, Texas, it's 242 miles and there's hills along the way. The speed limit is 85 on a Texas highway. So you're going 90, 95, and then anybody that's drove a Tesla long enough knows that anything above 72 significantly eats at the battery. So at 90, or God forbid, I'll drive 82. I'm driving under the speed limit on a road that allows my race car to drive as fast as it wants because I'm worried about the battery drop. Like, that's annoying. You gave me a race car and then you told me to keep it at 70. Like, the worst was California, where there are no speed limits, not literally, but technically, before the pandemic, it wasn't uncommon for someone to pass you on I-5 on your way to LA going 140, 150. It's insane how fast they. And here I'm driving in my 210-mile range little Model S, and if I go over 69, I can't make it to the next charger.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I think that is one of the things, right? The funny thing about the switch between ICE application to EV, I'm pretty sure you've seen all these, flyers going around, the old F-150s and Dodge Rams. There's usually the city average on consumption and the highway average. Usually the ICE applications, they give a better highway average than the city one. It's absolutely the other way around with EVs because of all the recuperation and regenerative braking. And the numbers that you see as a range, you have to take it with a grain of salt because it also combines the weather effect, the way you drive, the environmental conditions. When I say environmental conditions, even the wind direction matters the most. Just like you fly between East and West Coast, one way you are faster the other way. It's absolutely the case. I was driving, I think last week it was, I had approximately 10 miles of wind, but tailwind, not headwind. And I was driving 140 kilometers, I would say 75 miles an hour. And I had a consumption of 13 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So 60 miles, I was using 13 kilowatt hours, which is insane. But it is purely thanks to the tailwind I had. It was literally pushing me in the direction. The whole way was just single direction. So I had like an absolute killer. But on the way back, I had headwind. And it was exactly the same, 10 miles an hour headwind. And I had 19 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So that also has an effect. So that would be my next LinkedIn post. I would say the automakers are concerned about the head-on CD, the coefficient of drag value. I would actually encourage the automakers to make the rear end as rugged as possible. It's not so slippery because then the tailwind will actually give you more range, is my theory. And actually, my last trip, it kind of confirmed that theory because the same 10 miles an hour wind was taking up almost 7 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And the whole trip was 450 kilometers. So it cost me close to 25 kilowatt hours just because it was a headwind.
Yep. I don't. My friend Andy, a gentleman named Andy, that was at Stanley, is now at a new company, and he's a scientist type, so he's very analytical. But the company is a massive like process indicator company, so they map out what's actually happening in a real world scenario versus what you assumed in a lab. And he has a theory, and he's probably not wrong, that the thermal teams are not the systems that are created for them to make their decisions of when to heat, when to cool, when to stall, all the things that are involved in thermal management from where the tubes go. You've got some that are running lines. Tesla's new Model Y Austin, there's plates underneath, so it's a very different approach because they're dropping in those singular cell packs and you can't run tubes up and down the different rows of cells. But his concept that he wants to validate with battery and EV pack manufacturers is the battery supplier, the Panasonic, the LG, the whoever, they rely heavily on their suppliers' data to then put that in front of their clients. So there's limits to the anode, there's limits to the cathode. And so when they project a certain amount of range, those are often based on projections that came from the supplier's data. And then they put that into their data and provide it to these thermal teams. Well, he wants to build a system with his company that actually tracks thermal management in a much better way and reports back the tailwind effect, the headwind effect, the heat effect. And so they can start to look at all the driving factors in range loss and even map it out. Maybe the folks that are closer to the ground with a traditional skateboard pack versus Tesla now has that almost a foot off the ground with, a whole casting below it. Is that more optimal to keep them from overheating from underground heat? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the thermal scenario is a tricky one because, as you know, heat is slow. It has a bigger inertia to change, which means you can detect something with the thermal sensor, which sits somewhere. And by the moment you detect it, you're not detecting it inside the cell. It's on top of the cell or somewhere on top of a connecting bar, whatever that is. So you need to recalculate what could be the temperature inside the cell. So it's usually a threshold, and that threshold has a direct correlation to the cell core temperature. That's how they set this, let's call it threshold. And this threshold is not usually one value, it's range depending on the outside temperature and the inside temperature. So if it's a winter, it's a bit of a broad range. So because they let the ohmic resistance does it massive, so they don't invest active thermal energy. But if it is summer, they actually pre-cool the system because they know once it gets going and you hit 60 miles an hour because of the straits, you're going to take energy consistently out of the battery system, which means you're going to also create the heat inside the battery system. So they need to also predict this in advance. And I believe I read an article recently saying some of the German OEMs are trying to do an AI-based predictive cooling and predictive heating. So they know based on your navigation data, the year, the time, the external temperature, all these, so that it'll already predict, do I actually need cooling at all? And I believe, in my experience at least, Tesla does a wonderful job of cooling because they invest the least amount of energy that is required to cool and heat the system, except for the extremes, of course, the too cold and too hot regions. And most of the time, even moderately hot days, I would say 90-ish days, my Tesla rarely cools the system.
Really?
It's unbelievable. And other systems I've driven a couple of other cars, electric cars, and most of them you can actually hear the water pump going. And even before you start, because it needs to keep up and it knows that I've given a long target. I need to reach, I don't know, 350 kilometers. So it'll actually pre-cool the system and it'll be constantly cooling in the hopes to keep that temperature in the nominal range. So the philosophy of thermal management is completely different depending on which OEM you're taking into account. Some are really aggressive in terms of pre-cooling and preheating. Some are very, I would say, casual, the way Tesla operates. The only time I see Tesla system going on is when outside it's a moderately cold day, I would say 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and you select a charging point, which is on the way. Then it says, okay, I'm going to preheat the system because if not, I'll not be able to get that full power that I could get from a charging point.
What is
That's
it
the only
doing?
time you can force it.
What's it doing in this new preconditioning function? So when I select a charger on my trip, about 5-10 miles out, the thing comes up and says preconditioning for best battery charge.
Yeah.
What is that, the same thing? It's kind of preparing
It's the same thing. So the way you can visualize this, this is how I learned it. I'm a mechanical guy like yourself. I came from a long line of diesel engineering professionals, and I'm now selling batteries the last 11 years, and that's how the current market works.
Right.
The cells, they need a certain temperature. The cells are pretty much like human beings. They operate really well between the window of, I would say, 55 to 75 degree Fahrenheit. So close to 15 to 25 degrees Celsius. That's where they work the best. And they work the best in both directions. You can charge the cell well, and also you can discharge the cell well. Of course, depending on the manufacturer, the type of format, some cells, they are better in the lower end, some cells are on the upper end, but the common denominator is always the same. This is the range. So the trouble comes in, especially when you're trying to charge it fast, and the temperatures is pretty low. That's the troubled area. So what manufacturers they do is they have clever mechanisms to predict the temperature of the core before you get to a charging point. That's one way to do it. The other way how you could do it is like Tesla does it. Once Tesla knows based on your route that you need to stop on a particular charging station, that is a high power charging station, it'll actually it'll take energy out of your battery system to heat the battery system to an extent that it is already in the 55 to 75 degree Fahrenheit zone. So when you're then charging a system, it can accept the complete power that is given from the charging point, and it'll then, at some point of time during the charging process, it'll stop the heating. And that is the only time you will see the Tesla systems actively pushing the thermal energy in or out the system.
Yeah,
it's fascinating technology.
It's amazing, and it leads to yet another complaint of the process when you travel. Home, I'm happy. I got a destination charger. When we had 2 Teslas in the garage, you plug one in when you get home from work at 5, and you plug the next one in before you go to bed, and they're both full. Like, it was perfect. The superchargers, I've been fortunate that Texas has. There used to be 2 in all of Houston. So Houston's 125 miles in diameter, and there's literally buildings and houses the entire 125 miles. So it's massive, where half of California has either moved here or to Austin. But we only had 2 chargers when we moved home in 21. There were 2 Tesla superchargers, and at the time we still hadn't installed the plug, so we'd have to go to the one 20 miles from here. Now I drive home through the city and I see 1,000 red dots have popped up. It's insane. They originally were bringing them in on trailers for holiday weekends because it was so bad that they didn't have enough chargers. Well, they fixed that problem. But I keep getting the 250 chargers, which I love, because they start at anywhere from 1,000 miles an hour to 1,100 miles an hour. So you get in there, and if you got a 300-mile battery, 900 miles an hour, you get close to that 15, 20-minute charge that we all want. What I sit and watch and get frustrated as I watch is it's 1,000 miles an hour, then it's 700 miles an hour. And by the time I still need 40, 30, 25% if I want a full charge for a road trip, I'm now down at 200 miles an hour, and I'm better off just unplugging it and stopping again 2 hours later.
I hear you. I mean, this problem there's a solution for this problem. the thing is, the voltage is the issue here, because the higher the voltage, the less the current that you need to pump in. And the current is the devil here, because the more current you pump in, the more heat loss you're going to expect. That's why the system will regulate it in such a way that initially you'll be getting the complete 1,000 miles an hour, 1,100 miles an hour. And slowly it has to restrict it, because if not, the temperature and also the current itself will reach a certain threshold, which is not allowed. The solution to this is to increase the voltage. And this you see already in the cars like Ioniq 6. I saw a report recently, Ioniq 6, the first 55-60% of the SoC till the battery gets 60%. It's consistent with 250 to 300 kilowatts. It's consistently 1,000 kilo. So in that case, you actually can get 20% to 80% in less than 15 minutes, which is unbelievable.
That's the goal, because I mean,
that should be the goal.
Yeah, if you're over the age of 40 and you drink soda or coffee, you know you're gonna need to stop every couple hours anyway on a road trip. So I can make it to Austin without charging, which is ideal. I can make it to Austin or Dallas or San Antonio, but Dallas is right. It's only 242 miles, so you would think with a 310 battery range that I should be able to make it, but I can't. I often have to stop. So
yeah, the 310 should also come with an exclamation. 310 miles, I think, if you drive 60 miles an hour, which is the case.
The EPA rating is a whole other topic. They're doing it in an air-conditioned building. They're doing it on a dyno, and there's no wind drag even factored in. It's just spinning the tires. I'm like, that's not realistic. Like, y'all, that's almost fraud. Like, you should be allowed to give me that range. I feel like you're lying to me.
Which is the case on the ice as well, to be fair. So, but the thing is, you don't have to wait 40 minutes to refill your car, which is one of the biggest complaints and fair complaints as well. And that's one of the reasons why Tesla is switching to 1,000 volts for their semi-truck and the Cybertruck. And that'll be the trend moving forward. That is my belief. So most of these guys have already gone 800 volts. You see the Porsche Taycans, the Ioniq 5, the Ioniq 6, and some of them are going beyond it. And also the Lucid Air has 900 volts of on-board voltage.
Yeah, I saw where Peter's not on. He's one of the few that hasn't converted to the NACS yet. He's some post that he put out that says it's just a plug. I don't disagree with him. It is just a plug, but having pulled up to a charge point last week and seeing the other 3 plugs that look like a nightmare to use, I was like, I couldn't even use a charge point, because they used to have an adapter for their mall chargers that you could stick a Tesla adapter on. The new fast chargers, where that adapter would normally sit, there's a whole other plug above it.
Mm-hmm. So it's a dual plug kind of setup.
Nobody cared about the post, but I posted it like 4 days ago. I showed, and the other thing that was crazy was, I love ChargePoint because they're Apple Pay, so you just double click your phone, hold it up next to the thing, and you're off to the races. So if you it's for destination chargers, it was perfect. You're gonna be at the mall for a few hours, and it's easy because Blink's hard to get in. Electrify is not as hard. EVgo, but Blink's impossible. I've never been able to get a Blink to work. So I like ChargePoint, but the normal screen that's just a typical touch screen that's easy to use on their mall chargers, the fast charger, they stuck this piece of plexiglass in front of it. So a screen with a touch button behind the plexiglass.
That's weird.
And it's so bad that all 4 of them, there's punch marks. There's people like I had to take my knuckle and knuckle it, like I had to hit it to get it to click the button behind it. And there's cracks in the plexiglass, and I'm like, whose idea was this? This is not a good functionality user in my world UX. This is not a good UX experience.
No, and this is a touch screen for a reason, right? I mean, why would you put a plexiglass on top of it? It's pretty weird.
I wonder if the client, because they were funded by something called Texas Wind Power, and I wonder if the client made just, we don't want these vandalized people. It's Texas, so granted, Austin's like the San Jose of Texas, but it's still Texas, so there are a lot of haters. All the oil and gas people, all my friends that work on drilling rigs think EV is sci-fi and it's never going to work, and you guys are all crazy. But Maybe they were worried about vandalism. I don't know.
No, and some of the criticisms are very fair criticism. I mean, you have to take that, as it is. We should not try to say that EV is the way to go. There are some things that needs to be improved. One of the things that you mentioned is the charging wait times, and the United States is a huge country, and someone who's never been to the United States, they will not be able to imagine the scale of this place, right? I
Right.
mean, drive from one state to another, it's like traveling between countries in Europe. And for that scale of a country, of course, you have a very valid established network of charging, but that is not enough per se. You need other technologies. And I'm a firm believer of swapping. I think swapping might have a place in the United States, especially in the United States, given the size of the country. Imagining drive through and waiting for your Coke or coffee, whatever that is, and then your battery is being swapped with a fully charged battery. You don't have to wait. It's
I think they'll
22
be good
minutes.
in the major cities, especially the congested one, like in New York. 90%, 80% of people that live in Manhattan don't own a car. And if they do own a car, they keep it outside the city. But if you have to transition into those neighborhoods every day, like a cab driver, like a delivery driver, all those people need somewhere to charge. That's hard to put charging infrastructure in Manhattan when the price per square foot is $3,000 or something.
Yeah,
It's insane.
crazy.
Um,
Yeah.
right now, there's if give Tesla credit if you want to give them credit. There is currently a charger every 2 hours in any part of this country on an interstate. There's
Oh,
a Tesla supercharger. If you drive from Los Angeles to Orlando, Florida, there is a Tesla supercharger every 2 hours, and they're
that's
often
nice.
empty. They're half of every one I went to this week were empty. Nobody out.
But when they're preparing for the future, right? Because I think the NCAS, the plug that they have now collaborated with other OEMs, I think this was a long-term strategy. But it did not happen by chance. I mean, must we know, and he's been a strategist the whole life. They have been establishing the whole network, especially also working with some of the big chains like Walmart and Moores and stuff. I think the positioning has been really critical. And the biggest confirmation I have is Mercedes-Benz saying that they're going to work with Tesla supercharging network is an amazing news. I mean, especially for the American customer in that case, because that is one hell of a car. And the only thing that I would complain about it is the charging network in Europe.
I'm on. So we were BMW people as a family before we became Tesla people, and then my grandmother's Mercedes, live or die, her whole life. She was a real estate agent. She'd buy a new one every 10 years. She'd save, all her commissions that she could, and then buy. That was her treat to herself. And her and her best friend owned the diesel tanks. She called it Mert and drove that for 20 something years. And she's still at 91 years old driving her last Mercedes that she bought at 80. So, love the brand. The EQS launch in 2019, that was bad. That didn't work out. But I've only had two careers in my life, and there's Europe and there's German. And so there's DIN spec and then there's German. There, if that was always the hardest hurdle in both my careers. Like you could get everybody in Europe and London to buy it, but it was when you got the Germans to agree to do it, game changing. Like BMW said yes, Audi said yes. Okay, we're good. Like we can go sell to the rest of the world.
That's true. They set the standard in this case. Yeah, I mean the standards are really high, especially in the automotive sector, and that you could see in some of the requests for quotations that we used to get, they're over 600 pages long, and we had like 2 weeks to respond to that.
Yep.
600 pages, and there are details that you'll not be able to believe. The attention to detail is out of this world, and that kind of reflects in the car, right? I mean, be it Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, these cars are really of high quality, especially in the ICE sector. And they're trying to catch up the same thing, kind of bring that side of their experience and expertise and try and match it in the EV space. And that's where I think the challenge lies.
Yeah, I do too. Somebody posted on one of my automotive posts that the BMW line that they worked on, it was X4, 5, and 6, was doing 500 per shift. which is insane. It's less
Yeah,
than a minute per car rolling off
per
the
car.
line. That's been my focus lately is if you really dig into some of these startups, it's like, Fisker was doing 3 minutes with Magna on the first line, which is
Yeah,
rockets. They're moving fast for a first
yeah,
launch like that. Like Model S first line was like, one guy called it a very well-oiled garage. And years later, they would still refer to it as a well-oiled garage, but it was also their most profitable. So the least automation and most profitable product they make, it's like something's there, but that only works in low volume. You can only do Lucid could do 50,000 airs and make them perfect. Can you
yeah.
make 500,000
100,000.
gravities and do the same thing?
So
That's what's
finally
gonna be
starts.
interesting on the luxury side.
And also the startups, right? I think there's a general misconception that you do one car which looks absolutely perfect, try to scale it. You don't have to go far, but try to scale 10,000 units a year. That is a huge challenge, trying the supply chain, making the optimization of the line. I think Tesla kind of set the pace in such a way that everyone thought, we could make a car. Tesla can do it, and they're successful. Let's make one. I think that's such a bad implication. You should look into the op. I heard that Lordstown they shut down now, which was a huge, huge story. Romeo Power is in trouble. Also, the same lines on the commercial vehicle side. There are tons of these startups which made absolutely beautiful, brilliant cars, one-offs and prototypes. But production is always a challenge.
I had to get so I took over our EV markets and I think as early as 15. So, or 14. So I'm at the tail end of Fisker One, now Karma. I'm at the tail end. Faraday hasn't gone bankrupt yet, but they're about to go bankrupt. And
Yeah,
Tesla's in the middle of launching Model X. And so I watched that singular high-end sedan model over and over. And I mean, I think the Faraday one's like $300,000. Like it's insane.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then comes Rivian and says, you know what, let's just launch 3 programs all at once. And that to me was brilliant because you kind of, yeah, you're still launching really expensive one, but the van was the genius part there because you had Sprinter vans and you had Bright Drop kind of. Rivian and Bright Drop are pretty along the
Pretty similar.
same path,
Yeah,
but Bright Drop had GM doing this out the door, and Ford, even the Oshkosh vehicle for the postal service.
right.
I think it's a Ford chassis. Is what they used on the test track at least. So that's a
Okay.
combo project because Oshkosh is really good at making top hats, if you
Right,
will. The
right.
thing that goes on the chassis, that's what they've done for hundreds of years for the military and fire trucks and whatever. But them joining with someone that makes the chassis for government bids and industrial orders, that's the whole other thing that's going to be interesting how these all merge because there's auto and there's everybody else.
Right.
And so I spent the first 6 years of my fastener career working in industrial. So
Okay.
John Deere, Caterpillar, Daimler Truck, Kenworth Truck, like trucks, trailers, giant mining, giant ag vehicles, and giant construction vehicles. And from their purchasing models to their tier relationships, they're crazy different than auto, and there's almost no automation. So as these semi programs like Tesla Semi, I think they learned the hard way that trucking's not like making a car, and so
No.
why we keep seeing the delays. And I was lucky enough, to see, the progression of that project, and it's insanely amazing. But how do you scale it and how do you ramp it is much different because in trucking, like the United States, they put all the chassis together with what's called a huck bolt. It's like this
Mhm.
giant bolt that looks like a nut and bolt, but you squish the nut onto the bolt. So if you're anywhere in the
Okay.
U.S. and you see a trailer or a truck semi driving next to you, it looks like nuts and bolts all along the chassis. It's actually huck bolts all along the chassis. It's on every
Mhm.
train, every bus. Anything in the United States that's bigger than a pickup truck, they're using huck bolts to put the chassis together. Well, these are huge tools that, two-handed, 35-pound, 25-pound tools that are squishing this metal nut onto this pin or bolt. And
Right.
so it's so manual. And if you go into a Daimler plant, the same guy or gal has been putting that product together for 20 years. Like they know when the rig's not working. They know how to get it off if they screw up. There's so much that goes into that that's very, very manual. And Tesla's not a manual company, they're an automated
Okay.
company. So, how do they and some of the other ones start to bring? The first one I saw was Harbinger Truck. I don't know if you saw that. They're using a casted battery pack.
Oh, really? Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Yeah, another post that I think people cared about that one because it was pretty neat. They're the first trucking application that's using an automotive solution.
Interesting. I mean, trucking per se, regardless of the powertrain, is a totally different animal, right? So producing a mass production car is completely different than putting together a truck or a bus.
Right.
And the amount of knowledge that goes in there is unbelievable. And if you're electrifying that, I think Tesla got the battery and powertrain part really well because they're using, as I saw, they're using the same steering wheel from the cars. The infotainment system is from the car. They're actually using the same motors. They're using the motors from Tesla Plate because it's powerful enough and it's more than enough. The only thing that's probably new is the battery system. They have 9 of them squished in under the cabin, and it's well placed. And I think it has
Nine
close
or
to
three?
3 rows of
Oh,
three each, so 9. At least from the pictures that I saw online,
I
it looks like
I helped on the box, so it was 3 boxes. In I don't get past the box. So for me, everything I've ever done in my career is designing the mechanical box
right,
around the.
right,
So like I would design stuff for their penthouse where all their fuses go on their traditional battery packs, studs and fasteners and clips and all this other stuff. But then on the semi, like I would always hear people refer to the 3 boxes or 10 times what's in a Model Y is basically the math that we got.
right, right. I'll send you a picture on LinkedIn. I think I posted this a couple of months ago. It's a really interesting position that they chose because everyone else they're going for outside the chassis, outside the rail kind of design, which is far away from the cabin. Much easier to service for sure, but it is also exposed to the environmental conditions, heat and dust and whatnot. The
One of the
Tesla
mid
system
range,
sits
it's underneath, it's not exposed.
no, it's directly underneath the cabin, so it's not exposed. So I think that's one of the reasons that they can afford to have such a long range because you don't have to invest energy again to heat or cool the system.
Because everybody else, because in automotive, you have the same problem that you see in trucking, and it's going to be even worse in trucking. Is automotive? A lot of the legacies either were or still are trying to ram EV into ICE architecture. So where the gas tank was, let's throw a clunky battery box in there, and where the engine was, let's put all the inverter package and let's pick the batteries wherever we can get them. Like it's crazy. Well, trucks will do a similar path, and they build the truck out because the engine's an engine. So they're even the startups like an XOS, like when you see those prototypes or they're actually have working trucks on the road, there's a big black box on either side, and those are the battery packs, and they're sitting there like toolboxes, and it's
Right.
like and it's the worst problem that every trucking company I've dealt with so far, every bus company I've dealt with, the pack is the hardest part for them to figure out. They've either partnered with Cummins and let Cummins build it for them, complete engine and pack, like most of the buses is a Cummins power pack and a Cummins engine. Like that's the route they went. Problem is
Right.
Cummins is 2 years behind on delivery for half of those systems. So now they're trying to make a box. It's got to be watertight. It's got to be airtight. It's got to be all these things. They don't know how to do any of that.
Right. Right.
And
Especially the sealing is a massive challenge if you're talking about huge battery systems, right? It goes through torsion and what. Are you working also with sealing technologies when you're talking about fasteners?
we do that. So from a silicon seal in the battery market, our one effort makes a little fastener that goes in what they call the e-fill porthole. The fastener will seal metal on metal. It'll do a helium tight seal by itself, but due to the
Oh,
volume
wow.
and the potential of errors that could happen on that lid hole, You can't guarantee what the lid's going to look like. So they often will use a silicone seal, where we used to have to get crazy creative with the box applications because some of them go through an eBay. So you've got all these rivets holding the battery box together, and you put these cute little, nice seal, all these different seals that are available in the market. Plastisol's the number one. Well, that doesn't survive an oven.
Nope.
It's got to be able to survive. I think it's 350F for as much as 50 minutes. And there's
Right.
only two in the world that will pass that test, but they're insane. It's a company called Rimlex out of Europe. There's a
Okay.
Rimlex 310 that's rated to 270F, and there's a Rimlex 620 that's rated to, I think, like close to 400, but it's still not long enough. So yeah, the seal's a problem. The seal's a problem on the battery, and then the seal's also all over the car. Everything in
Right.
these cars has to be watertight.
Sure.
And
Sure.
and from a exterior clip to a stud, those are all IP67 or dunk rated fasteners that they're requiring. But then when we ask, how are you testing each of these applications to make sure they're watertight, it's crickets. It's like
Right.
sometimes they'll
Right.
drive it in a pool. And if it
Right.
comes out with water in it, then that means it failed.
And they also sometimes do crazy test rigs, which does not reflect the reality. After I've seen some sealing tests, they create a testing rig which potentially, supposedly, actually reflects the reality. But in that test, it'll pass. But if you put the same system in a vehicle or in an application, it'll fail because that test rig is just good enough for that particular system. It does not reflect real life stresses, the torsion, the shear. All those things happen when you're driving around, and the sealing still needs to be, watertight, right? That is one of the areas which I was working when I was at Webasto. Sealing of the battery system was always one of the pain points,
Yep.
especially
Well,
if you
and
have a huge battery system.
we saw it with Powerwall because the first rendition of Powerwall was inside a garage, and it's not heat protected, but it's extremity protected. So no
Mm-hmm.
rain, no massive amount of dust. This was Powerwall 1. Well, now it's Powerwall 2 and Powerwall 3, and they may even be on a fourth series at this point. As those are
I think so.
launching,
Yeah.
then it's like, okay, so it's two halves put together with all the stuff in the middle. Well, there's a flange that runs around the outside of the power wall that's inside that white casing that you see on your
Mm-hmm.
wall. There's with screws, rivets, whatever they wanted to put that together with at the time. Now you got to factor people were putting them on the outside of their house. And so it's like a whole new world. They could get wet, they could get,
Right.
and debris. So now you need an airtight seal. But if you're GM and you're building your first packs, you guys still got to use a bolt
Yep.
because they're not good enough at what they're doing yet to guarantee they don't have to take that apart. Because I remember like the second change, I suggested a rivet because rivets are dummy proof. I can put an O-ring on there and you don't ever have to mess with it again. But when you're in your first generation of a power wall or a GM Ultium pack, whatever it is, you're not good enough at that yet to guarantee you don't have to take it apart.
And also serviceability is also a topic. Some of these power walls they come with an open latch where you can get your fuses, your contactors. Yeah, that is also one of the reasons I think it's going to go through a level of optimization loop in the product life cycle.
If it's anything like the Chargers, I mean, if you've seen the bird's nest pictures of an Electrify compared to the V3 Charger and the efficiency of the wires, there's so many wires, and it's just like wire management in the car. It needs to be efforted because that's all
Yep.
assembly. They make
Yep.
they make the power. Everybody in the United States makes their battery cabinets for energy storage in Guadalajara. I'm joking when I say that. There's places in California or whatever, but if you go down to Guadalajara, huge electronic tiers like Samina and Flex and even Foxconn, they make those white cabinets with the metal handle, the electrical handle, and that's where
Yep.
all the batteries go. Then the tiers down there and the tiers in Fremont make all of the tubes and housings of the superchargers. And so it's literally just assembly. Nobody's making any of this stuff in house. Even
Mhm.
Tesla, as direct as they are, they're 70% direct versus Ford being 70% tier. Um, it this is still a tier product for them, but the inside is what matters. How fast can you get all the stuff in for a charger is important when you're trying to make 100,000 of them, 300,000 of them. And so now that we're looking at home charging, Powerwall's on year 11. And while it's nice that GM has this Ultium home battery and they get it, I think I saw your post the other day. Like you
Yeah,
could become an energy company as an automotive manufacturer if you do it right. The whole
right.
selling to the grid and residential solar and residential battery and residential charging, like there's a whole new world that could come out of these home charging systems, but it won't be as easy to launch them as it is putting it in a post.
No, it is not. Definitely not. I mean, now they are outside their comfort zone as it is because it's not about a car which is moving. It's more about talking to the grid, understanding the potentials. They're also having to deal with the AC power, the alternative current, not the DC anymore. They need an inverter outside the car. All these elements will come into play. But I think there's an untapped potential here with all these companies having their own battery cells. They can make their own energy. So they actually generate their own energy, just like Tesla's doing with their solar panels, their own battery systems for domestic storage. That is going to be the next generation of automakers. They have their huge inventory of cells, and they put some of them in the car, some of them in the power wall, and some of them, in huge containers for BESS, the battery energy storage systems.
Yeah, and because I started on the solar side before I took over EV as well, so I got to live that wild west world from fixed tilt solar to tracker solar. But the battery storage back then was all like Exalt and some of these big square battery manufacturers
Right.
selling to an energy storage company that wasn't sourcing their own cells. All they're doing
Yeah.
is building the cabinets out. And so solar energy storage was fairly expensive. That was probably one of the most expensive parts of the project. Now, like you said, I'm already buying 1 trillion cells for my 19 EV platforms. So for
Right.
me to siphon off 150, a $500 million business of energy cabinets, that's what Tesla's been quietly doing and no one noticed. They've been
Yeah.
selling these mega pack systems. As much as you're focused on residential, I watch utility pretty heavily,
Okay.
and they are dominating the energy storage market when it comes to utility solar. Like
Makes
it's insane.
sense. Makes sense. Makes absolute sense, especially given the understanding that they have of their own battery cells from the automotive applications, which is the torture test, as you if you will, right? You go through the vibrations that you have, the environmental changes, and then you put that cell in a residential application where the cell sits in the same spot the rest of its life. So you're taking it from a very cruel and torturous situation and putting it in a very simple and comfort situation. The only thing you need to do is make sure it works, of course, in tandem with all the applications around it. But it is still an easier transition this way than the other way around. I don't imagine, some of these stationary application manufacturers going into automotive. That is a no-go. But the other way around, it makes absolute sense.
They did
Absolute
it
sense.
right too. They scaled it. So they went, Powerwall at the time was I think like 1,400 2170 cells. A
Right.
power pack that they sold commercially to hospitals was 10 power walls shelved up. A mega pack was 10 power packs. So they make the
Okay.
power wall one way and they stick without the casing and all the fancy stuff and the logo on the front of Powerwall. You take all that off, it's just an egg crate full of cells and fuses and whatever. It's a hard metal. It looks like a gas tank, like a very
Right.
narrow gas tank. And so now you've already got these being produced in volume. So you stick 10 of those in your commercial product, and then you stick 10 of those into your utility product. And like that was the most no brainer. I think they've
Yeah.
fumbled around on the panel side and the solar tiles. I even tried to buy those myself, and they were not worth the investment.
Okay. Okay.
They're still trying to figure out the solar path. I know that they had this massive plant I used to go to in Buffalo. That's all they did was make solar panels, and I don't even know if they're in that space near much as they used to be. I think no
No,
one's
no,
trying to
actually,
do both.
yeah, I mean, if they are producing their own solar panels, then that is the end of the equation. I mean, they can produce their own complete chain, the value chain. They have it in house, which is amazing. But that is a totally different technology that we're talking about compared to the battery systems and the inverters that they know. So probably it's just safe to say that they will be definitely looking into it, because once they crack that, there's no stopping Tesla in that case.
That's been the biggest change in all the companies I ever called on versus what I'm starting to see people mimicking the Tesla model is the willingness to bring things in house that for 100 years were not made in house, and then even just heavily investing in your tiers instead of having the largest, like a Webasto or a Magna or Cooper Standard, to
Right.
pick some of the massive tiers in the world that support automotive. Those are billion-dollar efforts, $10 billion efforts, and they're their own corporations and they have markups and everything. So if they have a competitor that was 1/10 the size and you're a Tesla or you're Rivian and you have deep pockets, you invest in that competitor to the point where they're yours. And so they did that with plastics. They, what we call ship and shoots, which is, down and dirty dash, stuff that they form it one time, trim the edges and pop it in. Like it's not an engineered plastic. It doesn't have to snap in place. There's no widgets to it. It's just it's a canoe. Mold the canoe and cut the edges off and stick it out the door. Those are called ship and shoots. They were the first company I've ever seen that they either owned, I don't know if they own ship and shoots, if they've invested in ship and shoots, but they literally can argue plastics with you in a way that I'd never seen. And it was just, it's their supply chain they think differently. It's that, and I think everybody needs to get past that singular view and that God, say what you want to say about the Twitter debacle himself, but kind of those long-term visions. Sometimes he gets that right. Sometimes he does very well at seeing the whole energy. I talk about adjacent needs. So if I like the Schlumberger example versus Halliburton. Every time Schlumberger buys a company, they don't never ever buy a competitor. Halliburton would always buy out the competition. So if they made pumps and they were losing business to a pump company, they bought the pump company. Schlumberger would not buy the pump company. They would buy the fitting company, the hose company, the hydraulics company. They would buy everything around that pump. And now they're going in with a complete package and they're outdoing their competitor that only makes pumps. And he does that a lot. And I think auto really needs to start looking at that. Like if I want to dominate the van space, should I have a charging infrastructure in every region that we're targeting, and how do I deal with that?
Absolutely. And the charging speed, for example, exactly as you said, the numbers that he threw in the very first generation, they were preposterous. None of the battery systems could do it. But he did that because he knew that this is a long-term investment and the infrastructure is going to stay, so that the numbers should be future-proof in a way. So amazing. I mean, the vision that he had 15 years ago kind of changed the way we see the automobile industry today. Last question for you today. Would you still recommend buying an EV, regardless if it's a Tesla or an Ioniq? Would you still recommend an EV to your friend?
In a heartbeat. I think it's just the main. We were our programmers and I have our weekly call, and we were talking about EV this morning, and they were asking me which ones I recommend, and I did recommend it just for the simple fact that as much as I can complain about their service and their charging and all that, I've never actually taken a Tesla in for an oil change, obviously, but not even a brake change. We've owned 3 Teslas over 6 years. I've never changed brakes. The only thing that are currently problematic on the Ys are the tires seem to be wearing out fairly quickly, like under 20,000 miles quickly. But I told both my programmers, not only are you not paying for gas, and in Texas, energy is cheap. California, they pay 37 cents a kilowatt. I pay 9 cents a kilowatt.
It's 60.
Exactly. So we're deregulated in Texas, meaning there's no PG&E. There's no Aaron Brock company still causing fires out in California. There's 27 energy providers all pulling in from the same distributor. And so they compete with each other, which is what a fair market is. that's not normal in the blue states. The blue states all seem to still have that. Anyway, so at 9 cents a kilowatt, I don't even see my bill go up. I mean,
Right.
me plugging in the cars hasn't changed our bill at all. And so, yeah, I would recommend them all day long. I think if I were rich and famous and I had the ability to own a third car, I think the third car would still be gas. There's just a world to still own a gas vehicle, I think. But I still would recommend it. I don't think the 2035 goal that everybody keeps champion, I'm not there yet. I think if we're 50-50 by 2035, that will be a huge accomplishment. I think
Mm-hmm.
most people just don't understand what's going to go into these companies ramping to those volumes and converting the coal rollers and all the naysayers that just aren't there yet. There's just a lot of people that need more convincing, and I don't know what that's going to take.
I hear you. I hear you. Listen, Ryan, thank you for your time. It was amazing. And
Enjoyed it.
hope
Nice
to
to
have you
finally
on the
meet you.
podcast again.
Yeah, will do. Have a good day. Appreciate it. Thank
You
you.
too, sir. Take care. Bye bye.